Hi, my name is Eric Proud, and today I'm going to be talking about McDonald's leaving and selling their business within Russia. Before we start, here's what we'll be talking about in my presentation. First, we'll start with some key terms that you need to know during my presentation. After that, we'll go over a summary of the articles that I've read. Next, we will go over some business activities that take place during this event. After that, we'll be going over the impacts to both the world, Russian people, as well as McDonald's financially. After that, we'll be going over some of my predictions for the future and what this event may hold. And then lastly, we will go over some discussion questions. So, why is McDonald's leaving Russia, you may be wondering? Well, McDonald's corporate has put out a statement that says, "The humanitarian crisis caused by the war in Ukraine and the precipitating unpredictable operating environment have led McDonald's to conclude that continued ownership of the business in Russia is no longer tenable, nor is it consistent with McDonald's values." Now, here are some key business terms that we'll need to know going into this presentation. First, we'll talk about what a boycott is. A boycott is withdrawal from a commercial or social relations with a country, organization, or a person as a punishment or protest. Next, we have partial divestiture. Partial divestiture is when a company disposes of an asset or a part of their business by selling, liquidating, exchanging, or closing it for financial, ethical, political, or legal reasons. Next, we have the operating margin. The operating margin is the percentage of operating revenue that becomes operating income after removing expenses. Now, on to a summary of the articles that I've read. Firstly, as we already know, McDonald's has decided to sell the Russian portion of their business. McDonald's is doing this as a part of the larger major Western boycott in Russia because of the Russia versus Ukrainian war, and they have taken a stance against Russia. McDonald's has taken this boycott one step further, though, by actually selling their business, which no other business has done yet. During the sale, McDonald's will be removing all branding as well as logos from Russia, meaning that you'll no longer be able to get a Big Mac from your favorite McDonald's in Russia ever again. This sale has left thousands of employees unsure about their job safety under new employment, but we'll talk about that a little bit more later. Now, a Russian buyer by the name of Alexander Gavor has been found, and a deal is expected to be made with him for an undetermined sum. Alexander already owns around 25 franchises outside of Russia and would be a good fit for this deal. Now, the Russian people are obviously very sad about this news, but you should know that it's more than just not being able to buy a Big Mac, but it's actually been a symbol of hope since the Cold War ended for Russian people for about 32 years. And now the exit also has some unintended consequences for the United States. Now let's talk about some of the business activities that are going on in this current event. Firstly, we have partial divestiture. McDonald's selling the Russian portion of their business is a partial divestiture. This is because McDonald's is only selling one part of their business, being the Russian part, which is part of the full McDonald's worldwide corporation. It falls into partial divestiture, though, because they're intending to downsize because of ethical reasons. Next, we have employee retention. McDonald's is hoping that their 62,000 employees will be employed for 2 years under Alexander Gavor and his new company. In their deal, they're trying to get this signed into the contract, but nothing has been in paper yet and nothing has been signed yet, so they're just hoping to retain the employees. Next, we have terminating operations. Now, in March, when all of the McDonald's stores originally shut down, McDonald's had trouble with some franchise owners, especially in Moscow, keeping the restaurant open, and McDonald's couldn't exactly do anything about it because they were so far away. But since then, they have cracked down on the rogue people who have been still operating their stores, and all stores have been shut down now, and there are no operations in Russia currently. Lastly, we have public relations. McDonald's has made sure that they keep good public relations, so if they do ever come back, the Russian people will be happy with them. An example of them keeping public relations is them trying to keep employees happy by getting them employed under Alexander Gavor. Now, let's talk about the impacts that this deal is going to have to the world as a whole, the Russian people, and then McDonald's. Firstly, Russia is expected to attract investment from the East. They'll be doing this by trying to find a new chain restaurant to fill McDonald's hole that they have left in the economy. Experts are saying that Turkish, Chinese, Brazilian, and Indian brands will most likely be coming into Russia to fill this gap because they're allied and have easy investment into Russia. We can expect to find a chain restaurant, and I specifically think a Chinese chain restaurant, coming into Russia and possibly becoming the new McDonald's. Next, we have the United States losing an economic hold on Russia, and this is mainly because of the boycott as a whole. All of these major Western brands that are coming out of the United States leaving Russia will have the United States unable to really control what the Russian people are doing and where they're spending, and ultimately they won't be buying into an American brand. Next, major suppliers from around the world will be losing a client in McDonald's. McDonald's Russia is obviously a high volume client with over 800 stores, and there are hundreds of products that need to be supplied to McDonald's every single day, and this is costing suppliers millions of dollars, and they'll be needing to find a new client to make them up the losses in revenue. And lastly, McDonald's values will attract more customers worldwide to their store, because if they value Ukraine, or if they side with Ukraine in this war, they'll be more likely to shop where their values align with, and so these people will probably shop at McDonald's if they didn't before, or at least consider going to a McDonald's restaurant the next time they're looking for a place to eat. Let's move to the impacts on Russia. Firstly, before we get into the main topics, I'd like to show you two pictures. This first picture is someone who's stocked their fridge full of McDonald's burgers. They just couldn't see McDonald's leave, and the second that the announcement was made, they decided to stockpile all of the burgers that they could, just so they could have one last Big Mac a month after it closed down already. And they missed it so much that they just needed to pile their fridge up. And in the second image, you can see a man who's chained to their McDonald's store in protest of it closing down. And you can just see the passion that Russian people have for McDonald's as a restaurant itself and how much they don't want to see it go. Now on to some more impacts. So as I already stated, Russia was more than just a restaurant, but a symbol of hope. And that symbol of hope is gone, and it may even symbolize that there will not be any peace anymore between Russia and the United States, and that the world is really losing hope again for Russian people. Next, 62,000 people are still unsure about their employment status in the future because, again, no contract has been signed yet. And so these 62,000 people are wondering if they're going to need a new job, or if later when the contract is signed, there will be a clause that states that they will have 2 years of employment under Alexander Gavor. And while that is still up in the air, they'll be worried. Now, obviously, McDonald's assets are under new ownership as well as management, and so the way that they're used, whether for good or bad, that is yet to be known, and whether the business will fail or not is again yet to be known. Now, McDonald's successor is expected to be supplied by only Russian businesses, or at least mainly Russian businesses, so that means the Russian economy will be stimulated, and many suppliers from Russia will be able to get their products into Russian stores, and they will have a good influx of cash from, again, over 800 restaurants and stores. Now, Russia will be able to avoid many trade barriers between the United States and Russia because McDonald's Russia was previously supplied by obviously a lot of American brands because that's where the rest of McDonald's was supplied from. But since they'll be able to bypass this by using Russian suppliers, a lot of tariffs and trade bans will be avoided. And so that's a good thing and a net positive for these Russian McDonald's. Now also, Ronald McDonald House, which is obviously a very good foundation, and it's a hospital for children, that will be closing down because the McDonald's brand will no longer be in Russia, and so thousands of kids every year will not be able to go to Ronald McDonald House to get treatment for any illness that they have, which is very sad to see. And lastly, Russia is again becoming less reliant on the West, and they will have less of an economic tie to the United States, and so it'll be much easier for them to depend less on them and depend more on themselves in the future. Let's move to the impacts that McDonald's is seeing. Firstly, they will have a 4.49% reduction in their operating margin. This means that their operating margin is moving from 31% to around 26%. Their operating margin meant that they used to make around 31 cents of profit for each dollar of revenue that they made, and now they will be making around 26 cents of profit for each dollar of revenue that they make. This means that a total of 5 cents will be lost on every dollar, which is a very substantial amount when you count it up over the $1 billion of revenue that they make every year. Now they will also be facing $50 million a month of expenses due to their leaving Russia. And this is mainly going into the paying of the 62,000 employees' salaries until they get put onto Alexander Gavor's payroll. Now, this $50 million per month charge costs shareholders around 6 cents per share, which is not too much considering the stock cost way over $200. Now, next, I couldn't find too much information on this, but McDonald's is seeing a $1.4 billion, quote, Russian charge, which is being written off by them, which is a very substantial amount of money that cannot go unnoticed. Now, McDonald's is obviously closing a lot of restaurants, and they will be closing around 847 to be exact, which is a very substantial number because they do not have too many restaurants, and this actually made up 3% of McDonald's net profit. And so McDonald's is going to have to face or find ways to make up this profit in some ways because they were making over $200 million of profit from Russia alone. Let's predict the future now. So I believe that McDonald's share price is going to rise in the future. McDonald's share price initially, during when they first shut down, and then when they announced that they'd be selling their business, both took a large dip, but you could see the stock bounce back insanely quickly. And so now, McDonald's stock price is where it was right before they announced it, and it's still continually rising. I think that they'll be able to reach all-time highs because they did reach their all-time high just at the start of this year, and that was at $269.69, and their stock is hovering around the $250 range, and I don't think a $15 increase in their stock price would be too crazy, especially seeing that this is a good move on McDonald's part because of the ethical reasons involved. Next, I expect Eastern restaurant chains to infiltrate Russia, as I was talking about earlier, and I don't think that a Russian franchise would be as successful as an Eastern franchise moving into Russia for the same reason that McDonald's was so successful, because it was an out-of-the-country brand that was really in high demand. And now, adding on to this, I don't think McDonald's new owner, Alexander Gavor, will see too much success with his brand, whatever he decides to name it, because it truly is not going to be McDonald's, and people will always remember the stores that he owns as previously McDonald's, and when they go there to shop and they don't remember that they're eating a Big Mac, and they see that it's not as good as a Big Mac, I don't think that they'll be coming back for return customership. And now I also expect McDonald's its expansion into Asia and the other Eastern countries to slow down, as they're allied with Russia, and I think that because of their ties with shutting down in Russia, because of their beliefs, I think that they will also start slowing down expansion, but they won't close restaurants inside of Asia just because of their ties to Russia. Here are the discussion questions that I would have asked the class. So first, are you more likely to go to McDonald's knowing their stance on the Russia versus Ukrainian war? I personally am definitely more inclined to go to a McDonald's restaurant and buy their food because of their stance on the war. This is because I personally side with Ukraine on the war, just like McDonald's does, and I feel that shopping somewhere where your values align is very important, and you will feel more in tune with the restaurant, and you will feel like they care about you and care about the world, and it's very important to shop where your beliefs also align with. Next, Is it an ethical decision to still do business in Russia, even though everything is going on? I personally think that it is an ethical decision, or it's ethical to still do business in Russia. I think as long as you acknowledge what is going on and that it is a wrong ship, I think as long as you are siding with Ukraine, I think that your ethics and your values are in the right place. Even if you decide that you and your business making money is more important than showing Russia that they're making a bad choice, I think that you can still be ethical and you can still show your stance without having to completely stop doing business in a country. Now, are a business's values more important than their bottom lines? Now, this ties in with the last question, and I think that a business's values and their bottom line should both be at a balance. I think no business should be doing insanely unethical practices just to benefit their profit, such as things like child slavery or anything. And I also think that values are not always everything if a business can't be profitable. So I think, especially in this stance, I think that your bottom line may be more important than your values, because at the end of the day, I don't think Russia is going to listen and they're going to continue doing the war no matter how many businesses pull out of Russia. Thank you for listening to my presentation. I hope you enjoyed.